I think it's important to understand that Jesus experienced two different kinds of suffering. First of all, the Bible tells us that he was abandoned by his friends, all but a few anyway. He was falsely accused of terrible things. He was unfairly condemned. He was railroaded. He was mocked and humiliated publicly. He was beaten and whipped, spat on. He had a crown of thorns shoved onto his head. He was forced to carry his own cross, and he was crucified, which was a horrible way to die. That's one kind of suffering that Jesus experienced. But there's another kind. Luke 22 talks about the night before Jesus was crucified. He knelt down and prayed, "Father, if you are willing, remove this cup from me. Nevertheless, not my will, but yours be done." An angel from heaven appeared to him, strengthening him, and being in anguish, he prayed more earnestly, and his sweat became like great drops of blood falling down to the ground. This was just hours before his death, and he knew it was coming, and he was in anguish. A few hours later on the cross, about the 9th hour, Jesus cried out with a loud voice, "Eli, Eli, lama sabachthani," which means, my God, why have you forsaken me?" And Jesus, when he had cried out again with a loud voice, released his spirit. First of all, it must have been extraordinarily difficult and painful to utter anything, much less cry with a loud voice when he was hanging on the cross. But he cried out, and what he cried was, "My God, why have you forsaken me?" I believe that the anguish that began in the garden a few hours before was the start of this process, getting closer and closer to the realization that the Father, with whom he had been so united, that there would be a separation, that the Father would forsake him. That brought on him incredible agony. And this is not how the first death works. Oftentimes people die peacefully. This is not how the first death works. It doesn't include this sense of abandonment from the life giver. That's exactly what Jesus was experiencing. This was suffering of a kind on a whole other plane, from being beaten, humiliated, abandoned by friends. This abandonment, this forsaking, was on a whole other level. Isaiah 53 includes a prophecy about the death of Jesus. It says, "It pleased the Lord to bruise him. He has put him to grief." The bruising was the death, reminiscent of the prophecy in Genesis 3 that we've looked at, that said Jesus would be bruised. And it also says that Jesus would be put to grief. That's his suffering, this suffering on a level unprecedented and unbearable, being abandoned by the life giver. I don't want to dismiss at all the suffering of Jesus. It was intense. It helps us understand what the second death is. It also helps us understand how much he must love us to willingly go through that. He volunteered and he stuck with it. Certainly, both the death and the suffering of Jesus demonstrate his great love for us. And unfortunately, some people stop there and they think that the demonstration of love is what the whole Jesus thing was about, what the whole cross was about. But the wages of sin is death, not suffering. So while Jesus suffered, and his suffering helped show us how much he loves us, it did not accomplish what Jesus came to do. It did not reverse the curse or satisfy the penalty of sin. This is why it's so important to recognize when suffering is emphasized at the expense of death being understood and recognized. The suffering of Jesus was incidental to his life and death on earth, but it achieved nothing in the grand scheme of things when it comes to sin and salvation. The devil would love for us to get fixated on suffering and forget all about that little matter of death.